Alright, this is Mr. McSwain, and for this video we're going to be walking through the installation of a virtual machine in Virtualbox. If you do not have Virtualbox installed, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to virtualbox.org, and then in the download section you're going to pick the operating system that you are placing this hypervisor on. Now note that this is a type 2 hypervisor. When you're installing it, it is actually sitting on top of your parent operating system. So this version of VirtualBox is actually sitting on top of Windows 10. Note that whenever we're going through the installation process, we're going to have to make sure that we give enough of the resources that it does not interfere with the actual operation of the parent operating system, because that is the thing about a type 2 hypervisor, is the fact that it sits on top of an operating system and requires resources for it to be able to function. Alright, so for this tutorial, when you're installing VirtualBox, typically you'll just take the defaults, but whenever you get done installing it and you're running VirtualBox, this is the window you will be greeted with. However, you'll notice that there are no virtual machines to the left-hand side. That is because I already have several that I've installed. So for this tutorial, we are going to be creating another virtual machine for Linux Mint. This is an operating system that for Linux that I personally like, because it is similar to Windows. So anyone that is used to the Windows platform but has never used Linux before, it's more of an easy transition than using something along the lines of like Ubuntu or Kali, which are kind of their own variation of Linux that does not resemble the Windows environment. Now, if you are using a Mac operating system, I would suggest utilizing Ubuntu, as it looks very similar to the Mac operating system, but for Windows users I always recommend Mint. So I actually went to the Linux Mint website and downloaded the ISO for Mint. I'm not going to walk through that process because this tutorial is for any type of operating system ISO, not just for that one. So you'll want to determine the operating system you want and go get that ISO image from that website. Alright, so for the installation process, first thing we're going to do is click New. Once we click New, this is going to bring up a prompt that is going to be the initial creation prompt that is going to allow us to choose the image that we're wanting to install. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that under the name section, this is going to allow you to give the virtual machine a name. So I am actually going to call this one Mint 2. And then once you have typed in the name of the machine that you're wanting to give it, you have the option of coming down here and choosing the ISO image that you're wanting to associate to it. So you're going to click this little drop down arrow to the right. Now you'll notice I have them already listed here, but you will not. So what you're going to want to do is click Other. This is going to bring up your folders, specifically your downloads folder, and as you can see I have several ISOs listed here, but we're going to go down here to the Linux Mint Cinnamon 64-bit, and we're going to choose that, and we're going to hit Open. Now what's going to happen at this point is that you'll notice that the ISO image bar here is going to change to the name of the location where that ISO image is stored, and you're going to see that the other edition, type, and version are going to be turned into a dark gray because the system is actually determining that Linux Mint is a variation of Ubuntu. Alright, so then we're going to click Next. Alright, now at this point what I want you to do is remember that since this is going to be a virtual machine that we're going to use for testing, I'm going to give it a very simplistic username and password, something that is easily remembered and easily done. It does not have to be super secret, because this one is for testing. Now if you're building a virtual machine that you're going to be using in a live environment, I definitely of course recommend you not using password 1 with a capital P as your password, okay? But for this one, as you can see, there are no red any indicators that anything is wrong, so therefore we can move forward with this username and password. Now, if over here on your host name you notice that this is not a green check mark, that it is kind of like a yield sign that is red, check the name that you have given the host name and make sure there's not a space or like a hyphen or an underscore, because the host name has to be alphanumeric, no special characters. Okay? Next, we're going to go into the additional resources screen. This is going to be where you're going to choose how much RAM and how many CPUs you're going to give it. Now, this is why whenever I was telling you that this is a Type 2 hypervisor and I said that I'm running this on top of Windows 10, as you can see here, they've given me kind of a orange area that is for caution, and then a red area to say that if you use into this area, you're going to be actually overtaxing the machine, and the machine could stop functioning and crashing. Now with this one, notice how I have 8 CPUs, and it kind of goes more of a, I mean, yes, it's more of this kind of cautionary color, but in my personal opinion, never go past the green. So since Linux uses very minimal specs, I'm going to just leave it as the default with 2 gigs of RAM and 1 CPU. And I'm going to click next. Now we can increase this later if we want to, so don't feel like this is anything that is set in stone. Now, if the variation of the operating system that you download actually comes with what is called a VDI file, this would be the location where you would actually point the machine at that VDI file. And basically what this is it's kind of like if you had the hardware of one computer and you had the exact same make and model of another machine and you just swap the hard drives. The machine itself doesn't need to load any new drivers or anything, it just picks up where it left off. That is the concept with a VDI file. Now, if you are running Linux, Linux is going to tell you that it's going to have a minimum of 16.5 gigs worth of hard drive space. Now, it doesn't necessarily need that, but by default, I try to give every virtual machine that I create a 20 gig minimum. So 20 gigs gives you more than enough space for everything. Now, with a Windows-based virtual machine, you may want to give it a little bit more, as the Windows operating system does take up a good chunk of hard drive space just in of the operating system. So, alright, now that we've done that, we're going to hit Next. We're going to validate that this is all of the information that we have put into the system that we just got done doing. Once we've done that and validated everything, we're going to hit Finish. And what this is going to do is this is actually going to create the shell. Now the shell is going to be all of the hardware specs that your machine is going to be using from your actual physical machine. Now, if everything goes smoothly, it will actually attempt to boot the machine automatically and go into a session of loading. What you're going to notice here is it's saying that it cannot do a guest install. That's okay, because I want to show you another way of actually installing the ISO onto the shell. So what we're going to do is highlight the machine and we're going to hit Start. Alright, what this is going to do is this is going to actually power up the machine and allow us to go into the machine itself. Now, when this is booting up, sometimes it can go instantaneously, sometimes it can take a few minutes. My thing is you know, don't be super in a hurry, is basically what I'm getting at. So, while that's loading, I'm going to tell you a few more things about what's going on inside of VirtualBox. So when you have a machine, and I'm going to go to one of mine that's pre-built here, and if we highlight this machine, I'm not going to power it up, but what I want to do is I want to go into settings. So if I go into settings of this virtual machine, we should be able to see the changes that can be made. It looks like I'm going to have to pause the video and allow this to all kind of boot up and catch up real quick. So I'll be back with you momentarily. Alright, so it looks like everything's starting to catch back up now. That took about another minute or two. But what I'm wanting to look at first is, as you can see, our virtual machine is starting to power up in the background. But what I'm wanting to show you is the settings of the machine that I actually had already built. So we're going to walk through the tabs real quick so I can kind of tell you what each of these do for future reference. So under General, you're going to notice that there's a Basic, which is the name of the machine and the operating system that it's related to, and this is kind of typically associated with the icon you see to the side. Alright, under Advanced, you're going to see the locations of where the snapshots and the clones are kept. The description, you can create a description for the virtual machine, but it's not necessary, and then you can actually have data encryption for your disk if you want it. Now, under System, this is going to be where after you have built the machine, I told you that you can always go in and change the settings. Well, while the machine is turned off, you can actually tell the machine under System, as far as the motherboard is concerned, whether or not there are disk drives associated to it, and you can increase the amount of RAM. If you go under Processor, you can increase the CPUs. Now, if you go under Processor and you notice that the CPU count cannot be changed, that it is stuck on 1 and this entire bar is grayed out, then what you're probably going to have to do is enable virtualization in your BIOS. Okay, now in order to do that, you're going to have to shut the machine down, you're going to have to boot it back up and go into the BIOS. And in the BIOS, under System, you're going to find an option for virtualization, and it is going to have the option to enable. Once you do that and then boot the machine back up, you should be able to change the number of CPUs that are listed here. Now, if you notice a few quirky little issues that are going on, my suggestion is, after the research that I've done, is to come under this Acceleration tab and change this option from default to none and uncheck this box for nested paging. Okay, and that should kind of get rid of some of the quirky issues. Under Display, you can choose how many megs of video memory are going in and the number of monitors that you have for that virtual machine. You can also go into if you're going to have remote display, which I never turn that on, and if you're going to allow recording to happen inside of the virtual machine. Alright, next we can go to Storage. This is going to be where your hard drives are located. Now you're going to notice that whenever we get into the other machine that we're creating and loading, we're going to have to mount a disk. Now this is another location where you can actually mount a disk into the virtual machine, where you can actually choose this and choose the disk that you want to actually have it virtually mounted in order to load the ISO and so on and so forth. Now for this one, even though it says Mint, notice that I do have it pointed at a VDI that says Kali. I can change that, create a new hard drive if I would like to, and then start from scratch. Now under Audio, this is going to of course be the defaults for whatever audio output you're using for your normal machine. Networking, this is going to be where you're going to set up to 4 adapters that are going to be like functioning NICs on your virtual machine. The options that are going to be listed here are NAT, bridged adapter, internal network, host adapter, generic adapter, or generic driver, NAT network, cloud network, and not attached. Okay, in order for a NIC to be functioning, you first have to check for it to be enabled. Inside of this, what I want you to know is NAT is network address translation. This is going to be where your virtual machine is actually going to go through the NIC that is associated to your physical machine, go to your router, and get an actual functioning IP address so that your virtual machine can go on the internet on its own. Bridged adapter is going to be where it is utilizing the same network connection as your physical machine. And then internal network is going to actually be where you set up an individualized internal network that only other devices that are inside the same internal network can communicate together. This is going to be if you're doing any kind of like penetration testing or stuff like that. By utilizing an internal network, you don't have to worry about the attack going out into the internet. For mainly testing purposes, really, these 3 are the only ones that you're going to be worried with. I'm going to go ahead and just tell you, remember, NAT is what you need if you want to get to the internet to do updates on your operating system and everything, and then internal network for your testing. Host-only adapter and all of these others are being useful if you're needing to set up something like an internal firewall or something along those lines to where you have multiple adapters doing multiple things. Serial ports, USB, shared folders, and user interfaces, I'm not going to spend any time on that. These are just additional contacts that you can place into your virtual machine. Shared folders, of course, is like it says, you can create a folder that you can share between other devices that are on the same network. In other words, you could create a virtual file server and have all of the files listed inside of that server shared to everything else on your network. Alright, so that's a generalized understanding for the settings. Now let's go ahead and hop out of here and go into our virtual machine that we are creating called Mint2. Now, Remember how we got the error that said that it could not do a guest install, and so I told you that we had to boot it manually? Well, that was because that the ISO did not stick. Okay, for this, to correct this, there's two methods. Well, there's actually three. One of them is to go into the settings like we just did and mount the virtual ISO into that CD-ROM section. The other two is right here in front of us. One is we can go into this drop down and go to other, and just like what we did initially, we can go into our downloads folder and we can find the ISO that we want to point it at. So we just come in here, we have our downloads folder, and we find the ISO that we want. We click on it, we click open, and as you notice, it takes over and we can hit mount and retry boot. Okay, now the other option for that is I'm going to hit cancel on this, and then I'm going to go into the third option. The third option is with the machine running, I can go into devices up here at the top. I can go into optical drives, and then I can come over here to the side and I can choose the disk file. Now notice how it's already listed here and checked. Now don't ask me why it's showing two of them, but they're there. If they weren't listed there, I could, however, go to choose a disk file, and then yet again we will go to the same location to where we're in downloads, and we would choose the operating system we want and hit open. What that then does is you go into devices, optical drives, and then you're going to see it checked. So it is checked now. So then what we want to do is we want to go into machine and then come down to reset. Now I know reset sounds like a scary word. However, for virtual machines inside of Virtualbox, this just means reboot. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on that. We're going to say yes, we want to reset. And then what's going to happen now is we're going to notice that it is going to try to go into the ISO that we have plugged into it. This is then going to give us our prompt for the ISO, and I am actually going to click in there, click the word capture, and now my keyboard is inside of it, and I'm going to hit enter to actually set it up to where I can install the operating system that I want to install. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire concept of setting up the installation. This is merely just to show you the process. What would happen next is it would go through the entire installation of Linux Mint onto this machine, and then we would have a functioning Linux Mint machine. Alright, but while this is up, I'm going to show you the different features that are on here. File is, of course, going to give us like reset all warnings and our preferences for how our machine is going to look, and close. Close on this one is like hitting the power button, and it gives you options to choose. Machine is going to give you various things, but really its settings is going to be where we get to the same settings location that we saw prior whenever we were looking at the machine that we had before. Now, reset is going to be to reboot it. Pause merely pauses the machine in its current state, and then the next time you power it up, it's just going to pick up where it left off, which is one of the benefits of having a virtual machine. Alright, we can take a snapshot from here of the machine once it's installed. We can get a functioning backup, a full backup. Alright, the next option, of course, is view. This is going to be kind of like thinking about adjusting the monitor settings is really what we're doing in here. And this will allow us to make the monitor bigger or smaller, however we want. Input is strictly keyboard. Okay, so if you click in here, you're just going to see like some various 3 keystroke options that you can send to the machine. Devices, we've already looked at. This is going to be where the shared folders, optical drives, audio, network, and USB are here. However, realize that a lot of the settings in these cannot be changed while the machine is running. Okay, one of the main ones that can be changed, of course, is going to be the optical drives, and that's like you're inserting a CD-ROM into it. Alright, now one last thing that we're going to go through just to kind of finish everything up is I'm going to go in here and I'm actually going to kill this install by going to close and then telling the machine to power off and clicking OK. Alright, now as you can see, this machine is powering down. Once it gets completely powered down, this entire window will actually disappear. Alright, now that the window has disappeared, I've got my Mint 2 machine down here that we just created. The next thing I'm going to show you is if something messes up, if you want to get rid of a machine, if you want that machine gone because you don't need it anymore and it's merely taking up space. In order to remove a machine, you can click on the machine. You can right click and see various small options. One of which that I didn't mention before, but I'll mention really quick, is clone. This is kind of like Snapshot, only it takes a fully functioning clone of the machine and allows you to rename it and have it two of the same machine. This is super handy if you have a machine that is set up and it's 100% the way you want it, but you don't want to risk making changes to it and messing it up. You make a clone of it and then do the changes on the clone. But what we're getting at on this one is we're going to click on remove. Now, whenever remove comes up, this is what I want to talk about. You have cancel, which will stop the situation and you won't have to do any changes. Remove only will merely remove the shell. The hard drive will stay in place. Everything will stay where it's at. If, however, you choose delete all files, which I'm going to choose, that has now deleted the VM shell and it has deleted the hard drive space. So that 20 gigs that I had given to that VM is now free on my hard drive once again. Now, here is the benefit of that. I now have that space back. That is a huge benefit. Here, however, is the negative.